The microphone hit the stage floor with a dull thud that echoed through Studio 6B at NBC Burbank. Johnny Carson, mid-sentence in his opening monologue, stopped. Not paused. Stopped. His hand, which had been gesturing toward Ed McMahon with a punchline about Congress, dropped to his side. The studio audience, 300 people who had been laughing 2 seconds before, fell silent so quickly you could hear the hum of the stage lights. Doc Severinsen looked up from his sheet music. Ed McMahon's smile froze. The camera operators glanced at each other, confused. This wasn't in the rundown. This wasn't Carson being Carson, the controlled master of late-night television who never missed a beat in 30 years. This was something else. A voice had come from the audience. Row K, seat 14. A man in his late 60s, wearing a faded green military jacket with 3 medals pinned to the chest, had stood up. His hand was raised, not aggressively, but with the determined posture of someone who had waited decades for this moment. "Johnny," he had said. Just that. One word. But it carried weight that stopped everything. Carson turned toward the audience. The hot stage lights caught his face in a way that made him look older than his 58 years. His eyes, usually dancing with mischief or calculation, were different now. They were searching. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. 20 minutes earlier, the night had been routine. Carson walked on at 5:28 p.m., shook Doc's hand, nodded to the band. The monologue was going well. Jokes about the economy, politics, a celebrity scandal. The audience laughed in all the right places. Ed's timing was perfect. Then came the joke about military spending. Nothing controversial. A light jab. "The Pentagon says they need $5 billion for a new weapons system." I said, "Can't you just ask Doc to play louder?" The audience laughed. Doc pretended to be offended. Standard Carson. That's when the voice cut through. "Johnny!" Not shouted. Not screamed. Just spoken with enough force to carry 15 rows and pierce through 300 people's laughter. Carson stopped mid-gesture. His smile didn't fade gradually. It vanished, replaced by something television audiences had rarely seen on his face: genuine uncertainty. The director in the control booth made a frantic cutting motion. "Keep going," his gesture said. "Stay on script." But Carson wasn't looking at the booth. He was looking at row K. The man in the military jacket was still standing. Under the studio lights, his face was more visible now. Weathered. Lines that told stories of things seen and not forgotten. His jaw was set, but his eyes were wet. Carson's hands slowly lowered. He looked down at his desk, at the stack of cue cards with the rest of his monologue, at the coffee mug Ed always placed exactly 3 inches from the edge, at the organized chaos of his nightly ritual. Then he looked back up at the man. "What's your name?" Carson asked. His voice was different. No performance. No calculated pause for effect. Just a question. Carson stopped mid-monologue. The entire studio froze. "James Kowalski," the man said. His voice shook slightly. "2nd Infantry Division. Korea. 1951. The audience didn't know whether to clap or stay silent. A few people started to applaud, but it died quickly when they realized this wasn't a planned moment, wasn't a bit, wasn't part of the show. Carson took a step forward, away from his desk. The camera operators scrambled. Doc Severinsen's jovial expression vanished. Ed McMahon leaned forward, his hand moving to his own Marine Corps pin. He knew when to let silence breathe. "Mr. Kowalski," Carson said, and his voice carried through the studio with a clarity that made the 300 people lean forward in their seats. "What did you want to tell me?" James Kowalski looked down at his hands. They were shaking. Not from age, though he was 72. From something else. Something that had been building for longer than the drive from his home in Pasadena to this studio in Burbank. "My son," he started, then stopped. His jaw worked. "My son watched your show every night. Every night for 10 years. Past tense. The audience caught it. A woman in Row D covered her mouth. Carson didn't move. He stood in the center of the stage, between his desk and the audience, in a space that wasn't supposed to exist in television. He was off his mark, out of the camera's planned framing, in the no-man's land between performance and reality. He was deployed, Kowalski continued. His voice was stronger now, like a dam that had cracked and was now giving way. Desert Storm. January 1991. He wrote me letters. 23 letters. In every single one, he talked about coming home and watching your show. He said it was what he missed most. Not the food, not the weather. Your show. He said you made him feel like home was still there, waiting. The studio air seemed to thicken. Even the crew, hardened professionals who had seen countless emotional moments as planned segments, stood motionless. Carson's hand moved to his face, briefly touching his temple, then dropped. It was the only betrayal of emotion he allowed himself, but it was enough. He didn't make it home, Kowalski said. February 27, 1991. 3 days before the ceasefire. His name was Michael James Kowalski. He was 24. Silence. Complete and total. The kind of silence that doesn't happen in television studios, where there's always ambient noise, always crew movement, always something. This was the silence of 300 people and a 60-person crew holding their breath at the same time. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Carson turned to look at the control booth. The director, Fred de Cordova, was standing now, visible through the glass. His hands were raised in a "What do we do?" gesture. The network executives, watching from their offices, were probably already on the phone. This was live television. This wasn't planned. This was dangerous. Carson looked away from the booth. He looked at his desk, at the neat stack of cue cards with the rest of the monologue, at the prepared segments, at the careful construction of the show that had made him the king of late-night television. Then he looked back at James Kowalski. "Mr. Kowalski," Carson said, and his voice cracked slightly on the second syllable. He cleared his throat. "Would you come down here, please?" The audience gasped. Not a collective gasp, but a wave of individual sharp intakes of breath that rippled through the rows. This wasn't done. Audience members didn't come on stage. There were protocols, insurance issues, broadcast standards. Carson didn't care. He walked down the 3 steps from the stage into the audience section. A camera operator, thinking fast, followed with a handheld unit. The shot was shaky, unpolished, everything Carson's show never was. James Kowalski, still standing, watched Carson approach. His hand, which had been raised, slowly lowered to his side. His chest was heaving with the effort of held-back emotion. Carson reached him and extended his hand. Kowalski took it. The handshake lasted longer than handshakes usually do. Long enough for the camera to catch both men's faces. Long enough for the audience to see that Carson's eyes were wet. "I'm sorry," Carson said. Just that. 2 words. But he said them like they mattered, like they meant something more than television sympathy, more than performer empathy. Kowalski nodded. His free hand reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out an envelope, worn and creased from being carried. "I brought his last letter," he said. "The one where he wrote about your show. I don't know what I thought. I just wanted you to know." Carson took the envelope. His hands, always so steady on camera, trembled slightly as he held it. He looked down at the handwriting on the front. James Kowalski Sr. And an address in Pasadena? In the corner, a military postal stamp dated February 23, 1991. "May I?" Carson asked, holding up the letter. Kowalski nodded. Carson carefully opened the envelope, aware that every movement was being captured on camera, that millions of people were watching, that this moment was being recorded for history. But he moved like none of that mattered, like the only thing in the world was this letter in his hands. He unfolded the paper. The handwriting was neat but hurried, the writing of someone stealing moments between duties. Carson read silently for a moment. Then he looked up at Kowalski. "Would you mind if I read part of this?" "That's why I'm here," Kowalski said. Carson turned to face the camera. The operator, still with the handheld unit, adjusted focus. Carson's face filled the screen. No desk between him and the lens. No careful positioning. Just a man holding a letter. He read, "Dad, it's so damn hot here I can't even describe it. But at night, when it cools down a little, we sit around and talk about home. Rodriguez talks about his mom's cooking. Williams talks about his girlfriend. I talk about Johnny Carson." Carson paused. His thumb traced the edge of the paper. "The guys laugh at me, but I don't care. I tell them that when I get home, the first thing I'm going to do is make a huge bowl of popcorn and watch The Tonight Show. I tell them about the time you had that comedian on who did the bit about airline food, and I laughed so hard I fell off the couch. I tell them about Ed's laugh, about Doc's suits, about how you always make everything seem okay, even when the news is terrible." Another pause. Longer this time. "They don't understand, but I think you would. When I watch your show, even in my memory, I don't think about where I am. I think about where I'm going to be. Safe. Home. Laughing. That's worth fighting for, Dad. That feeling. Johnny Carson makes me remember what we're protecting." Carson lowered the letter. He stood there, in the middle of the audience section of Studio 6B, holding a piece of paper written by a young man who had died 4 years ago, and he didn't speak. Ed McMahon, watching from his chair, had his hand over his face. Doc Severinsen had set down his trumpet. The woman in row D was crying openly now, and so were a dozen others scattered through the audience. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. Carson walked back toward the stage. James Kowalski followed, guided by an usher who appeared from the wings. They climbed the 3 steps together. Carson led Kowalski to the guest chair, the one where movie stars and comedians and politicians had sat for 30 years. "Sit," Carson said. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. Kowalski sat. Carson sat in his own chair behind the desk. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the expanse of wood and coffee mugs and cue cards. Then Carson did something he never did. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a plain white envelope. He held it for a moment, seeming to debate something internal, then set it on the desk between them. "Mr. Kowalski," Carson said, "I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone publicly." The audience leaned forward. The cameras tightened on Carson's face. "My son," Carson said, and his voice was barely above a whisper. "Richard. He died in 1991. June. Car accident. He was 39. The audience gasped. This wasn't public knowledge. Carson had kept his private life fiercely private, had built walls between Johnny the performer and John the father. "I got letters," Carson continued. "Hundreds of them. People telling me they were sorry. People telling me they understood. People telling me their own stories of loss." He tapped the white envelope. "I kept everyone. I read them when I can't sleep, when the house is too quiet, when I need to remember that pain is universal, that none of us are alone in it." He looked at Kowalski. "Your son's letter. The one he wrote to you. That's one of those letters now. It's a reminder that what we do matters. Not just the jokes, not just the entertainment. The feeling. The connection. The sense that there's a place where things are okay, even for 30 minutes. Kowalski nodded. Tears ran down his face unchecked. "I want to keep this," Carson said, holding up the letter. "If that's okay with you. I want to keep it with the others. I want to remember Michael. I want to remember that somewhere in a desert halfway around the world, a young man thought about popcorn and late-night television and home." "Keep it," Kowalski said. He would have wanted that. Carson placed the letter carefully on his desk. Then he did something else unprecedented. He stood, walked around the desk, and embraced James Kowalski. Not a Hollywood hug, not a performance. A real embrace, the kind given between people who understand loss. The audience didn't applaud. They stood. Not in ovation, but in witness. They stood because sitting felt wrong, because this moment demanded respect. Doc Severinsen, without any cue, began playing softly. Not the Tonight Show theme, but America the Beautiful. Slow. Reverent. Carson and Kowalski stood there for a long moment, then separated. Carson looked into the camera. "We'll be right back," he said, his voice steady again, the professional returning. But something had changed. Everyone watching knew it. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The next morning, every newspaper in America ran the story. Not on the entertainment page. On the front page. Carson stops show for fallen soldier's father. The letter from Michael Kowalski was framed and placed in Studio 6B, beside the stage entrance. It stayed there until the show's final episode in 1992. James Kowalski never paid for a meal in Pasadena again. Strangers would approach him, shake his hand, thank him for his son's service. And Johnny Carson, who retired 6 months later, kept his promise. Michael's letter stayed in that white envelope, in his desk drawer, among the others. When Carson died in 2005, his family found it there, worn from being read and reread. Because that's what leaders do. They don't just entertain. They remember. They honor. They make space for pain and turn it into something that connects us all. That night, for 15 minutes, Johnny Carson wasn't the king of late night. He was just a father who understood another father's loss. And that's the moment that mattered most.